Have you ever wondered what it's like to be in a city on the brink of destruction? What if everyone around you was feasting, laughing, and drinking, unaware that the ground beneath their feet was about to be consumed by fire? What would you do if you knew there was only one night left before everything disappeared? The warm wind blew through the narrow streets of Sodom, carrying a dense scent of spices, smoke, and sign. Oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the walls of the houses, while laughter and music echoed from the squares. To anyone passing by, the city looked more alive than ever. But for those with attentive ears, there was something strange in the air, a hidden silence behind the noise, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Lot, Abraham's nephew, sat at the city gate, as he did every afternoon, but that day his eyes could not rest. He felt a deep unease he could not explain, as if an invisible weight pressed on his shoulders. Then he saw them, two men walking down the main street. They were not like other travelers. Their steps were firm, their gaze piercing, and there was a light in them that did not come from torches or the sun. When they approached, Lot stood and ran to greet them. "My lords, please, come to my house, wash your feet, and spend the night. Tomorrow you can continue your journey early." They exchanged a quick glance before answering. "We will spend the night in the square." But Lot insisted, almost pleading, as if he knew there was danger in those streets. Reluctantly, they accepted. Inside the house, the setting was simple, lit by a timid flame. Sarah, Lot's wife, prepared unleavened bread, and their daughters watched the mysterious guests with curiosity. But before they could eat, a disturbing sound began to grow outside. Voices, footsteps, crude laughter. The men of the city surrounded the house, pounding on the door. "Lot, bring out the men who came to you. We want to know them tonight," they shouted, laughing with malice. Lot stepped outside, closing the door behind him, trying to calm them. "My brothers, do not commit such wickedness. These men are under my roof, and I have the duty to protect them." But the voices grew harsher, demanding, pushing, threatening. Then something impossible happened. The two visitors opened the door and, with a simple gesture, struck all those outside with blindness. Cries of confusion filled the street as they stumbled, unable to see. Lot froze. These men were no ordinary travelers. One of them spoke with a deep voice. "Lot, take your wife, your daughters, and anyone who belongs to you in this city. Leave immediately, for we are going to destroy it. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah has reached heaven, and the Lord has sent us to end it all." Lot's heart pounded. It was real. The unease he had felt was a warning, but what if no one believed him? As the cries of the blind echoed in the street and the distant music continued in the squares, Lot felt the weight of an impossible choice: warn everyone and be ridiculed, or flee in silence and carry the guilt forever. He did not know it yet, but this would be the last night of Sodom. The sky over Sodom looked ordinary, but there was something in the air no one could sense, an invisible tension, like the silence before a storm. While the city drowned itself in music, wine, and screams of pleasure, Lot ran through the narrow streets, knocking on doors. "Quick, we must leave. The Lord will destroy this city," he shouted, breathless, to the men who were to marry his daughters. They laughed. "Lot, have you been drinking? This is just another one of your tales. Tomorrow will be the same as always. This city has never fallen, and it never will." Their disbelief cut into his heart like a blade. He knew that every second wasted would cost lives. He ran back home, but with each step, the weight on his shoulders grew heavier. Inside, his wife stood by the window, restless. His daughters trembled, unsure if it was fear or doubt. The two visitors, now unmistakably angels, stood motionless like sentinels of a world about to end. "Lot, take your family now," one of them said firmly. "Do not look back. Do not stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away." The words were like a silent thunder, heard not with the ears, but with the soul. Lot hesitated for a moment, thinking of everything he was leaving behind: his house, his land, his history. But the angel's gaze allowed no delay. They stepped out the door, and the air seemed heavier. A strange heat began to spread through the night. The city behind them still shone, as if nothing was wrong. But high above the feasts and laughter, dark clouds began to form, swirling like a vortex. Then Lot's wife spoke. "But what about our friends, our home? We can't just leave everything." Lot quickened his pace, holding his daughter's hands. "Do not look back," he repeated. "What's coming is not meant to be seen." Each step felt heavier. In the distance, the mountains stood like shadows against a horizon that was changing color, the black of night shifting into a deep red, like embers beneath ash. A low, deep sound began to rise, like 1,000 thunders mixed with the crackling of burning wood. The angels led them by the hand, almost dragging them. It was as if the earth itself was breathing faster, ready to release something terrible. And then it happened. The sky split open. A flash lit everything for an instant, so bright it felt like day. Then, rain began to fall. Not water but fire and sulfur. Every drop that touched the ground burst into flames. The rooftops of Sodom caught fire in seconds, and the streets became rivers of molten destruction. Screams rose, but were quickly swallowed by the roar of devastation. Lot felt the heat burning his back, but did not dare to turn his face. "Faster," one of the angels cried, and then he heard the sound he would never forget, the cry of his own wife. A cry that began in fear and ended in silence. He didn't need to look to know, but his eyes, betrayed by instinct, sought her, and he saw she had stopped. Her face turned toward the city, her eyes fixed on the flames, as if unable to believe the end had truly come. In an instant her body hardened, her hair, skin and clothes turned to shimmering white crystals. She did not fall or cry out again. She became a pillar of salt, standing eternally, facing what she had lost. Lot felt a crushing pain in his chest, so strong he almost stopped too, but the angel pulled him hard. "If you stop, you will die as well." The night behind them became an inferno. Sodom and Gomorrah ceased to exist before his eyes, not as ruins but as ashes carried by the wind. The smell of sulfur burned his throat, and every step felt like running away from death itself. When they finally reached a small plateau, Lot collapsed to his knees. The heat still glowed at his back. He didn't know if he cried for the city, for his wife, or for the fact that he was alive when so many had been left behind. The angels looked at him for a moment and, without another word, vanished into the darkness of dawn. Lot and his daughters were alone. The city was gone. The silence now was absolute. But inside Lot, the words still echoed. "Do not look back." He would never forget. Have you ever experienced a silence so deep it felt like it was screaming? Have you felt the weight of surviving when everything around you was destroyed? And worse, have you carried the guilt of not being able to save the ones you loved? The sun was beginning to rise, but there was no beauty in that dawn. The sky, still tinged with gray and red, looked like an open wound on the horizon. Lot stood on the top of a hill, looking at what was left, or rather, what was no longer there, of the city that had been his home. There was no steady smoke, only a dense curtain of dust and heat that distorted the view. Down below, where there had once been streets and markets, there was now only a desolate, blackened field, marked by cracks and craters, as if the earth itself had been torn apart by the hands of an invisible giant. His daughters, exhausted, sat on a rock, holding each other. There were no more tears. Pain had dried everything. Neither of them dared to speak their mother's name. It was as if saying it would call back the moment she stopped, and looked back. Lot closed his eyes, and for a moment, the sound of the wind was replaced by memories. His wife's laughter as she kneaded bread, the smell of herbs drying in the yard, the touch of her hand, firm and warm. Everything felt so close he could almost reach her, but when he opened his eyes, all he found was emptiness. "Father," the soft voice of one of his daughters pulled him back. "Where do we go now?" He had no answer. Everything he knew had been burned away. Friends, streets, even fertile fields. Nothing remained. The promise of the angels had been clear. Flee to the mountains. But the mountains no longer seemed like a refuge, only a cold, unknown place. And then Lot realized something that scared him more than the heat of the fire: the silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of life. No birds singing, no running water, no distant echoes. It was as if creation itself had gone quiet in the face of God's judgment. With each step, the ground crunched underfoot, fragile, as if it could give way at any moment. Dust clung to their skin, leaving everything rough and dry. Heat still radiated from the ground, as if hell itself lay just beneath the surface. Lot thought of the men who had mocked him the night before. He thought of each face that laughed, each voice that ignored the warning. Where were they now? Had they cried out for help? Had they remembered his words when the sky opened? He clenched his fists. The pain was not only for his loss, but for the weight of survival. Why him and not someone else? Why was his life spared while so many were swallowed by destruction? "Come on, we must keep going," he said, trying to hide his own fear. The three figures walked toward the mountains. The path was uneven, and each turn revealed more ruins. There was no other city in sight, no sign of shelter, only stones, dust, and a dry wind that carried the bitter smell of sulfur. When the sun was high, they stopped in the shade of a large rock. Lot tried to rest, but the image of his wife returned like a blade. It wasn't her transformation into salt that haunted him. It was the exact moment she chose to look back. He knew, deep down, it wasn't just curiosity, it was attachment. The inability to let go of what she loved, even knowing God had said to leave it all behind. As they ate the little they had brought, a silent question grew inside him. What if I had looked back too? The fear was not only of what had been left behind, but of what was still to come. That night, they camped on the cold ground. The stars shone, but there was no poetry in them, only a reminder that they were completely alone under a sky that had witnessed the end of an entire city. The silence remained the same, dense, almost suffocating. Lot closed his eyes, trying to sleep, but the distant sound of something, perhaps a stone falling, perhaps the wind, made his body shudder. He knew he could not go back, but he also did not know if there was truly anywhere left to go. The echo of that silence would be his companion for a long time. A silence that not only reminded him of what had ended but also warned. Some things, once lost, never return. Have you ever been so lost that any sound felt like an answer? Have you ever felt that even God's silence might be saying something? And worse, have you ever been afraid to hear it? The path to the mountains was not just physical, it was a desert inside the soul. The rocky ground cut into his sandals, and the cold wind from the heights burned his face. With each step, Lot felt he was moving farther away from what was left of his old life. Behind him, the plains still smoldered, a distant but constant reminder that there was no going back. His daughters walked a little ahead, silent, as if words had become too dangerous. From time to time, one would glance back, not toward the city, but toward their father, to see if he was still holding on. The day advanced and the sun hid behind the clouds. Shadows stretched long and the cold began to creep in. When they finally reached a plateau, Lot decided to stop. From there they could see the mountain peaks closer than before, yet still far enough to remind them the journey wasn't over. While his daughters prepared a small fire, Lot stepped aside, seeking silence to think. That's when he heard it. It wasn't loud, not even a clear call. It was a whisper, as if the wind carried an ancient voice, older than the world itself. Remember? He froze, his whole body tingling. He looked around, but no one was there. His daughters were busy, and there was no sign of any traveler or animal. Remember? His heart pounded. He knew this wasn't a simple echo. It wasn't just a tired mind playing tricks. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was from within. He closed his eyes and tried to breathe deeply. The images came again. The night before, the angels, the urgency, the hand that gripped his firmly, pulling him out of the house, the words that echoed like a hammer, "Do not look back." And with it, the memory of the moment he lost his wife. The whispers seemed to insist, "Now firmer, remember. So you don't repeat it." Lot felt a weight crush his chest. It wasn't just a warning about the past. It was about the future, about the choice he would have to make from here on, about not allowing what God had spared to be wasted. When he returned to the fire, his face was paler. His daughters watched him in silence but asked nothing. He sat down, but the whisper kept on, as if it had found a place to live inside him. They ate little that night. The cold was sharp, and the wind made the flames tremble. The smell of ash seemed to mix with the distant scent of sulfur, as if the destroyed valley still wanted to be remembered. Lot looked at his daughters. They were all he had left. And yet he knew that, even among the living, the shadow of Sodom could still follow them. Not in stone or fire, but in memories, habits, temptations. The night dragged on, and the fire began to die. Lot stayed awake, staring at the sky. The stars looked different, colder, as if they watched his story from afar without intervening. At some point, he drifted into sleep and he dreamed. He was back at Sodom's gates. People laughed, traded, lived as if nothing would ever happen. He tried to shout, but no sound came. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned and it was his wife. Her eyes were intense, full of tears. "You can't save everyone, but you can guard what's left." Before he could answer, the ground shook, and fire rained from the sky once again. He woke with his body frozen, his heart racing, and the feeling that those words were more than a dream. At dawn, he rose with determination. He knew he couldn't afford to live only on memories and regrets. The whisper of the mountains wasn't meant to crush him, but to remind him there was still something worth protecting. And with his eyes fixed on the peaks ahead, he took the first step into a new day. Have you ever felt like the last step of a journey was heavier than the first? Have you ever wondered if survival alone is enough, or if living requires more? The mountains loomed before Lot like silent witnesses. Their peaks were veiled in mist, and the wind carried a bitter cold that pierced the skin. The path was steep, each step demanding more than just strength. It demanded will. And after everything, willpower was a resource Lot feared he might have already spent. His daughters walked behind him now, their eyes tired, their bodies aching from the climb. The air thinned, and every breath seemed to remind them they were not where they belonged yet. The memory of the city's destruction, the roar of the fire, the cries fading into silence, still clung to their thoughts like smoke that would never wash away. Lot paused, resting against a rock. His legs trembled, but it wasn't just fatigue. The weight in his chest wasn't tea from the climb. It was from the choice he knew awaited him at the end of this road. He remembered the whisper from the night before, "Remember, so you don't repeat it." It had been following him since then, like an invisible thread pulling him forward and warning him not to fall back. But part of him feared that no matter how far he walked, the shadow of Sodom would walk with him. The morning sun rose slowly, burning away some of the mist. The rocks ahead began to glow in gold, as if the mountain itself was offering a promise of safety. Lot took another step, and another, until finally the slope eased. They had arrived. The plateau was narrow but solid, sheltered by stone walls on three sides. A spring bubbled from a crack in the rock, its water so clear it seemed untouched by the world below. For the first time since the escape, Lot felt the faint trace of relief. But relief was not peace. They drank, they sat, and silence wrapped around them. Lot looked at his daughters, their faces still marked by loss and fear, and understood something. Escaping destruction was only the first battle. The greater fight was ahead. To rebuild without letting the past dictate every decision. He walked to the edge of the plateau and looked back. The valley stretched far into the distance, a dark scar on the land where Sodom and Gomorrah had stood. Now there was only a shimmering haze, smoke still curling upward, as if the earth itself mourned what had been lost. He thought of his wife, her laughter, her questions, the way she used to prepare the house for guests, all burned into a single moment of disobedience and longing for what should have been left behind. And in that moment, Lot made a decision. He would not look back again, not with his feet, not with his heart. He turned to his daughters, his voice steady despite the ache in it. We will live here, and we will live as if the fire is still chasing us, not in fear, but in remembrance. They nodded, not fully understanding but sensing the gravity of his words. Days turned into weeks, and the mountain began to feel like home. The spring fed them, the rocks protected them, and the quiet taught them to listen to themselves. Sometimes, in the stillness, Lot thought he heard the whisper again, softer now, less like a warning, more like a reminder. What you guard today shapes what remains tomorrow. He didn't know if it was God's voice, his own thoughts, or the echo of the angel's urgency that night, but it didn't matter. The meaning was clear, and so, the man who had fled for his life learned that survival was not the end of the story. It was the doorway to a different kind of courage, the courage to keep walking even when the danger had passed, because some fires burn inside far longer than the ones that fall from the sky. Lot no longer waited for the past to release him. Instead, he chose to release the past. He stood one last time at the mountain's edge, the wind strong against his face, the smell of ash faint in the air, and without a word, he turned away from the valley and stepped back toward the camp. The journey was over. The life ahead was his to build. If this story spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have many more stories to tell. Stories of people who ran, people who fell, and people who, against all odds, were still seen by God.